speak to people in the market, and not everyone understands, really,
Yeah,
what
and it's
DevOps is, and people think it's, about a bunch of tools that, you bunch them together and that's it. But it's not necessarily the case. It's a mindset, right?
Fundamentally for us, that we had to concede this a little bit, because when we started the team, we knew we didn't want to call it DevOps, because in my opinion, you don't solve the dev and ops problem by putting a DevOps team in the middle. That's not bringing them closer together, right? And so we knew that we wanted some other name for this, and at the time Google were starting to use this term called site reliability engineering. And we're not Google, right? But there was no other really good terms around at the time. And funnily enough, when we started to hire people for SREs, nobody knew what SRE was. And so we had to call them DevOps whenever we were looking to hire people. So we need to hire a DevOps. And then when we got them, we said, actually, really, this is site reliability engineering, and this is the way we think about it. And it's quite difficult, because people at the time knew that DevOps was a thing, but they didn't really understand what that meant. And so I think now these, like, SRE is a more industry accepted term. We're seeing it used a lot more. And for me, it better describes the role that we play. But DevOps, better describes the culture as a whole and its shift in engineering culture.
Scaling, right, is one of the hardest things to do. How have Pushpay managed to scale at the rate that they have without breaking?
As I kind of mentioned before, like there's this idea of feedback loops. And so how do you learn from the mistakes that you make along the way? All right. And so, like, you can't afford for everybody to make all of the same mistakes all of the time. So one of those is like a process around postpartums or around incident reviews. That's a really good way to address scaling issues that appear. From a technology perspective, we had to make a lot of changes along the way. When I first started, we had servers that were sitting in Auckland, in Albany, I think. And that wasn't really useful, because all of our customers were in the US. And so making them come across the Pacific for a web page was, mean. And so we decided, well, we had to move to a different provider. And so we moved to a different provider in Rackspace, I think was at the time. And then making those decisions from there, saying, well, okay, like, we're able to scale to a certain amount. What can we do next? So moving to the commodity cloud, like we moved to Amazon, AWS. And some of the reasoning there was we needed to be able to react again a lot more quickly. And so what if we need a new database server? We can't, start a sales order, get it signed off, and have somebody provision it and take a couple of weeks or months for a server to appear and then use it. Like, we needed it today, And so moving to the AWS cloud, for example, is a great way to solve that type of scaling problems. It allows you to react a lot more quickly to the changing demands that you have over time. The other thing is, like, that's technology, and that's been kind of interesting. It's been, a big journey for us, and a lot of people now are starting to make that move to the cloud, which is it's basically an expectation now, I think, of a lot of people.
Yeah, definitely.
Another aspect, I suppose, is just people. Like, how do you hire enough people to be able to build what you need? And so how do you make sure you make good hires, and how do you make sure you hire the right people and move like that? And so that was definitely an issue for us in the early days, and it all starts with the technology stack. A lot of people believe that you pick the best technology for the job, or the thing that you want to build, or your favorite technology. A lot of people do, but they neglect the fact that you should really, if you want to grow fast, you should pick a technology stack where you can hire people. If you pick some, artisanal kind of, language that hardly anybody knows, then you're going to find it quite difficult, right?
How you have kind of created this blameless culture at Pushpay?
Yeah, so the blameless culture, like, for us, it started almost at the start whenever I joined. And so the other engineers that we had at the time, especially our previous VP of engineering, brought this idea of blameless culture. And so we wanted to experiment and see if this would work. And we knew we needed to move fast. Like, that was really important. We knew that, like, we'd get this thing off the ground and be as, to be able to grow at the speeds that we wanted to, we needed to move really fast. When you move fast, you're going to break things. Like, things are inevitably going to break. Now, it's how you treat those failures that's really important. And so if you want to move as fast as possible and you accept that failure is a part of doing that, then you're going to need to learn from those failures. And learning from them means looking at them, figuring out what went wrong, and then fixing it and doing it again. Now, blame is really important in this game, because blame is the thing that, like, if you have it, then progress slows down and stops. And the reason is that if you, let's say you have a bug in production, or a machine gets destroyed accidentally, or whatever it might be that brings down your site. Now, when you go looking for a cause, like a root cause, as we typically do, or typically been taught to do in a lot of these processes, like look for the root cause. There's going to be one thing that happened. When you do that, you're going to end up with a name. You're not going to end up with a cause. You're going to end up with Dave. And so randomly, we don't have anybody called Dave in SRE, but if you do find, like, you search for root cause, you're going to end up with a person, and then if you blame them, Dave's not going to do anything after that, right? So he's not going to want to kind of make the same kind of changes. He's not going to put his neck out. He's not going to take risks, and he's not going to learn from it. And so removing blame from this equation was really important for us. I think blamelessness is something we need to agree upon and we need to do. And building that into your post-mortem process is quite important, because when you remove blame, a lot of people think you remove accountability. You actually don't. You get an increase in accountability. Accountability is somebody's ability to give their account, right? Which is the opposite of the impact of blame, right? And if you don't have blame, somebody's more likely to give their account. And so you get accountability. And so when we do postmortems and people aren't being blamed for it, they say, oh, if I'd have known this, I would have done that. Oh, cool. Maybe we can make this more obvious. There's a really good mitigation. That's something we've learned together as part of this process. Mm. And so it's building in those feedback loops. And I think when I think about this, like when we go through like a post-mortem process, we often ignore, like, if we talked about this kind of root cause thing, we're kind of trying to get to the root causes. Really, we have to accept that looking back on incidents, we have these biases that kick in. There's like hindsight that kind of kicks in. There's, outcome bias, like we know what went wrong. So how could you have done this? Given what's happened, how could you have made this decision? These aren't useful ways of looking at failure. Really, it's like a maze, right? If you're looking at a maze top down and you're watching somebody walk through the maze and they take a left, and you say, why did you take a left? You obviously don't take a left, take a right. They don't know that.
Yeah. If
you change your perspective and look from their perspective, you see, actually, we should have put a signpost saying go right. Right? This is obvious at the time. Like, it wasn't to them. Like, they didn't know which way to go. And so if you fix that problem, you can end up with better outcomes. And this is all part of the blameless post-mortem.
What is a post-mortem? Talk to me a bit more about a post-mortem and what that looks like at Pushpay. So when something goes wrong, how do you obviously you're measuring it. Out at the end of that, something goes wrong, what do you do?
Yep. And so immediately, as soon as possible after the incident has happened, so there's part of incident response, which is finding out, getting alerted, forming roles like incident commander and scribe and operator, and you have these different people involved in an incident. Once the incident closes and you all agree that it's resolved and that we've recovered, then as soon as possible you've got to get into that, write down the timeline, right? The reason this is important is because, like, human memory is a horrible thing. And again, once you've had a conversation with a couple of people, or you've kind of you've all, like, there's a swell of kind of understanding or like assumptions that are happening somewhere, then you'll change recollection of history. And so you need to write down everything that's happened. We use Slack, for example, for all of our kind of communications during incidents, because it makes a really nice timeline of things that have happened.
Yeah.
And so you got to build that timeline as soon as possible. And that's that perspective of going through that maze. That's the thing that you're building. You're drawing that kind of line, like your kids do in those books,